Hi, everyone. This is Jacob Rains, one of the student co-coordinators of DU Votes, which is Denison's nonpartisan voter and civic engagement initiative on campus. We are so excited if you're joining us virtually, either live or later watching this recording of our second event as a part of our 2020 election series. Last week, for those of you who joined us, we had a panel with international faculty sharing their perspectives on the election. This week, we are talking with the presidents of the leading partisan organizations on campus, their perspectives and involvement in the election. And in the coming weeks, we'll continue to have conversations on topics ranging from Black Lives Matter and social movements to COVID and the economy, polls and voting and behavior, and climate change. So a lot coming up every Thursday during this common hour spot, with some additional engagement and events happening during the evening. So to get started, we just want everybody who's with us today to introduce themselves, have some great student leaders on this call, and just want to learn a little more about them. So Shane, if you want to share a little bit about yourself and what organization you're with on campus.
Sure. I'm Shane. I am president of Denison Democrats. I'm a junior from Cleveland. I'm a political science major. I have been involved with Denison Democrats mostly starting my sophomore year, although a little bit my freshman year. Yeah, I guess, is there anything else?
No, I think that's great. Thank you. Let's go with Stuart.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Stuart, junior political science major from Westchester County, New York. I'm president of the Denison College Republicans, and I've been involved with them since early freshman, much more into my sophomore year. And that's me.
Awesome, and go ahead, Dadian.
All right, I'm Dadian. I'm the president of Denison Libertarians. I'm a philosophy, politics, and economics major, and I'm a senior. And I'm really excited for these election series.
Awesome, and did you say where you were from, Dadian? Sorry.
You're right, I didn't. I'm from Michigan. I'm from southern Michigan, Monroe. You probably haven't heard of it, but it's south of. Yeah.
Awesome. And Tate, if you want to introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, I'm Tate. I am the other student co-coordinator for DU Votes. I'm a sophomore. I'm also from Cleveland.
Got a lot of Midwestern representation on this call. So to start off, I would like to kind of hit on, we're kind of with the folks who kind of lead the partisan organizations on campus. So obviously all of you are involved in politics or one way or another. And I'd be curious to learn from each of you just kind of how you got interested or involved in politics. So Dadian, if we'll go in reverse order, if you want to start off.
Sounds good. Originally, I think I first got interested in politics in high school. I did Model UN my freshman and sophomore years, and then I was involved in Youth in Government, which is through the YMCA, and the Conference on National Affairs. So I've been doing that kind of stuff for a long time. I didn't think I'd be majoring in it, to be honest. I didn't think that that would be my main course of study. I would say, I think it was the 2016 election that really got me involved and made me realize that there was something much more significant to my life and to the lives of people around me, that political engagement is much more, engaging in democracy is just much more than casting a vote every so often. It's about influencing how policy is made. It's about influencing how people shape their lives. And that's kind of where I set off on that adventure. I've always kind of been a libertarian. I've always considered intentional individuals to be the best judges of how to lead their own lives, and I've always been a strong believer in local government. So, and of course, that's changed over the past couple of years as I've learned more.
Thank you. Really good overview of kind of how you got started and how things have evolved on your end. Stuart, how did you get involved in politics?
Yeah, so my journey's kind of been a long one with politics. From probably the age of 7 or 8 years old, I've had some form of involvement with it because my dad has always been a political person. My views have shifted here and there, all over the place during that time frame, but like dating, 2016 is when I realized that it was incredibly important to become involved and to know what's going on, because this thing that we all love, politics, is the driver of our nation and nations around the world. So it's incredibly important, and that's how I really got involved.
Thank you. And Shane, go ahead.
Yeah, like Stuart, I was really interested in politics from a pretty young age. I think like the first like clear political, like when I started really getting interested was probably in the 2012 election. And I always like Jon Stewart and the Colbert Report. I always watched a lot of when I was younger. That was really like got me really accessible way of getting me into politics, especially at a young age. So probably like roughly 8th grade is when I started getting really interested in it. But I'm from Cleveland, so like there's always been like, I mean, historically Ohio's been very much a key battleground state. So there were always like politicians like right next door, like coming to campaign. So that also really got me interested because I got access to like meeting the first Black president when I was like 11, like just big things like that. Yeah, I knew I wanted to be a political science major since like 8th grade too. So yeah.
Common thread among a lot of folks involved in politics is knowing from early on, but for other people it comes later for sure. Just out of curiosity, were any of you old enough to vote in the 2016 election? No, okay. And were you all old enough to vote in 2018, the midterm cycle?
Just
Yes.
barely. Yeah.
Okay, so that was everybody's first vote, was the midterms.
I voted like, I think I voted in 2017 actually.
In the local
Yeah.
elections? Okay,
Yeah.
yep, every year in Ohio, absolutely. Okay, awesome. So kind of looking more at, this from, individual, but also kind of group and party perspective, if everybody wants to share like, 2 or 3 issues that you really feel are important to you or your organization in this election, and are kind of motivating factors for kind of wanting to be politically involved in 2020 in this moment. And let's kind of go in reverse order. So Shane, if you want to start us off, if that's okay.
Yeah. I don't know if I can speak on behalf of my entire organization, but for me personally, probably the biggest issue for me is I feel like democracy is kind of being assaulted right now and threatened, and that's really scary for me. That's probably the most important issue. And then right very closely beneath that, I think for me is I'm really concerned about, I think it's like not strong enough of a word. I'm really worried about the influence of the animal industrial complex and like the violence it commits on a daily basis. And I think that's been kind of perpetrated more so recently, but it's just like a long-term historical problem that I think needs to be like a lot more attention on.
Great. Stuart, 2 or 3 issues that are kind of driving your attention and excitement or frustration, could be any emotion, in this election cycle.
Right. So I share that sentiment with Shane. I don't know if I can talk on behalf of my entire organization, but I know that for me personally, and something that has been an issue for me since probably 2016, is the state of polarization within the United States, the kind of collapse of civil society, which I think made the United States such a great democracy in the first place. And the second would be kind of linked to that, but how that involves our foreign policy and the way that America is looked at and its role in the world stage in promoting and maintaining democratic values from and preventing the rise of authoritarian nations such as Russia and China.
Thank you. Dadian, go ahead, please.
Yeah, along the same lines, of course, I can't speak on behalf of everybody, but I do know for sure at least for Denison libertarians, free speech and free expression are really important to us. And I actually noticed in both of the others, you mentioned democracy and democratic discourse, and I just want to express the fact that like free speech and free expression kind of goes along those lines, and the fact that we have the accessibility to politics and the ability to form organizations. That's definitely a big issue for third parties, right? Because currently I would say our electoral system isn't very accessible to third parties, to independents. And then just sort of beyond that, I think Shane kind of cut out, but I believe they were saying foreign policy and military industrial complex, but that would definitely be a libertarian issue as well. You know, you look at currently, Trump is working on peace talks between, I think it was the UAE and Israel, and then also the Taliban are having peace talks with the Afghan government in Qatar. So definitely sort of retracting our strong stick foreign policy and focusing more on a diplomatic approach and free trade and that kind of thing, sort of globalistic in one sense, but also kind of keeping to ourselves and not necessarily getting involved in every war that we have to, that we feel like we have to get involved in. Those are two very libertarian issues that I would point out.
Just to quickly clarify, I do agree that the expansion of the military-industrial complex is also a problem, but I was saying animal-industrial complex.
Okay, yeah, because you kind of cut out and I kind of filled in the word there, but yeah, thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, the foreign policy was, that was me. You put two things together there.
So on the topic of kind of democracy, and Dadian, you were just talking about kind of how free speech ties into civil discourse, which it definitely does, and it's a value that kind of schools like Denison are really supposed to be upholding. I'd be curious to learn everybody's perspectives on kind of how would you describe Denison's campus climate right now for political discourse? Do you feel like students who kind of disagree on political issues are able to engage with one another, or people kind of able to exercise their First Amendment rights on campus? Or do you feel like most folks in this cycle have kind of sat in their chambers and kind of been pretty separate? And I just would be curious, like, you know, your personal experience, but also like, have you heard from other members of your organization about their experiences as well in that regard? And Dadian, if you want to, actually, let's have Stuart go first, because I keep putting you in the middle, Stuart. Sorry. If you want to go first, Stuart, take a crack at that. It's a long question. Sorry.
No worries. So along the lines of where it is right now, obviously it's kind of difficult with COVID, you know, in this time. If it were more safe, we would probably be out on quads having debates and having discussions about these kinds of things. In terms of the condition, I'd say, well, we have events like these, so we're, you know, the students and the organizations are making effort to have this kind of discourse. The only real place I know that Denison College Republicans feel least comfortable is in classrooms. They have often had issues where they may have their character judged based on their affiliation, and also that hearing stories of that, they don't feel very comfortable discussing their political beliefs. So frankly, I wouldn't necessarily know how the response would be if they feel they can express themselves, because they are afraid to, based on judgments on representation from larger national candidates that I think far too many people have come to associate and determine represents the values of all Republicans as a whole.
Thanks for that, Stuart. Shane, what's your perspective as a Democrat and the president of the Denison Dems, just kind of the experience Dems are having this cycle on campus with civic discourse?
Yeah, I don't think, I think that discomfort for us that we're focused around free speech comes from people feeling like they can't express their identity in a way that feels safe, which I don't think is as much of an issue at Denison campus exactly. But I think overall, people in, like, for example, like the trans community really feel like they can't even express their identity in a way that they feel is safe. So I think, like, for both sides, it's really kind of about expressing themselves in a way that they feel is safe. And yeah, I mean, I think I have heard, even though I'm not a Republican, I have heard from other Republicans that they do feel like that they have a hard time expressing themselves without being judged. And I don't think it really matters necessarily if it's fair where that's coming from, but I think it's really important that people don't feel that way, and it's something that I agree that we could do better to address.
Thanks for that. And Dadian, as a libertarian, and I know like the third parties obviously kind of having smaller representation, just generally speaking, on campus, I'd be curious to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I would definitely agree more with Stuart in the fact that I've heard from libertarians that they feel most comfortable in the classroom. Outside the classroom, they do definitely feel like their characters can get judged. And I think part of that is because people don't really know what we stand for. So they kind of fill in the blanks with things that they've heard, or sort of assume that we're against their ideology when that, or their identity or something like that, when that's not necessarily true. But I just want to speak a little bit more on like what I think Denison should look like. I think that democracy is less about a set of institutions, it's more of values that we embody. So definitely a culture of acceptance and a culture of respectful discourse would be ideal. And that's kind of one of our main talking points as libertarians.
So let me follow up on that point with you, Dadian, and I'll ask the same question of everybody else as well. What ideas do you have, like on our campus? I would definitely argue, and we're like the nonpartisan organization, so we're trying to engage with people regardless of ideological view across campus on just getting civically engaged. That there is some polarization at Denison for sure, and that not everybody is talking to one another or actively engaging with one another, and part of that might be fear of being judged or not being accepted, and I've heard it in classrooms but also outside of classrooms as well. And so I'd be curious to kind of learn what ideas you have to kind of foster this culture of both civic dialogue and free speech, but also those things across lines of difference, and how we can really do that in practice.
I would definitely say from more of an institutional or general perspective, we would definitely be interested in holding events like this that bring the different groups together. I think, talking to each other is the best way to sort of dissolve our I guess, antagonisms or antipathies, if there are any, between the different groups. I guess with libertarians, mostly we want to be heard and like kind of show up and have some representation so that people are sort of less unfamiliar, actually more familiar with who we are as people, and maybe sort of dissipate some of those false assumptions about our political identities and our characters. And I guess most of the ideas that we've come up with were more about social events, more about getting to know us as people. Because I don't think that if people who are on the opposite side of the political spectrum actually knew each other as people and started to talk about their values, they couldn't continue to have that kind of
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think it's Stuart was talking earlier about the decline of like civil society, nationally. A lot of that just has to do with like lack of knowing your neighbor, and everybody at Denison's kind of your neighbor. We all live together. It's a residential campus. So I think that's really important when we talk about fostering that culture of conversation and dialogue. Shane, what's your perspective on this? Are there kind of ideas that you have or heard from others to kind of help foster that culture of civic dialogue and free speech on campus?
Yeah, I think things like this are great for that, but I also think just the existence of our respective clubs is really good because it gives people like an organization where they feel that they can share ideas with people that they're comfortable with. I know it doesn't necessarily deal with the issue of crossing party lines to talk about political issues, but I still think it's important that people feel like they're being represented in a larger organization. I think that's the first step for people to express their political views without feeling isolated.
Definitely. And I imagine all of you have kind of experience within your organizations, it's not a monolith, and that you have members who disagree with one another on all sorts of issues, and that's a space for civic dialogue as well. Stuart, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm going to echo what Dadian said. I think it's incredibly important that we break down, I think, this culture we have that is an otherizing based on political party. I don't think if we understood each other as people on a broad scale, at a national scale, it would be possible to continue to polarize this way. There would be more empathy. That's something I think that we kind of lack for those who disagree with us. And also another point that he made was representation. I think it could be good to promote far more speakers, events across the political spectrum, which get those ideas out there, so that there's no real excuse to not understand who they are, what the values are, whether that's libertarian, Republican, Democrat, socialist, whatever it is. Those ideas would be out there, and we would be able to better discuss them. And then the last thing that I think could help is civil dialogue is kind of a skill in my view. We get wrapped up in focusing on our academics and in all the other stuff that we do that I don't think it's necessarily taught quite in the classes. And I think that a way to go about that would be perhaps before students even get here, teaching them how to engage each other civilly based on philosophy, politics, and all different kinds of issues, so that once they are really involved in the classroom and involved in our culture, it's an issue. It's not an issue because we've already dealt with it.
And on the topic of kind of hearing, from folks kind of from across the political spectrum, one of the things that DU Votes has been trying to do this semester is COVID has changed everything, right? Like we probably would have had a lot more on-campus speakers this semester. But as the various partisan organizations, for those watching, have been bringing folks onto campus or having discussions about particular issues, from their perspective, we've been trying to highlight that so that kind of students know that there's, various places they can go on campus to learn about these issues. And I think that's really important. And I would strongly encourage everybody watching, and just everybody at Denison, generally speaking, if you have not attended like a meeting, for example, of one of these organizations or an event that they're holding, and it might be, that you disagree with a lot of the things they stand for, I think that can be an excellent opportunity for engagement and learning. And I know that all of the leaders we have with us are trying to make those opportunities available. And kind of the 33 days we have left until election day, it's the clock is ticking for sure. So I want to shift a little bit to the election itself. And I think somebody had mentioned earlier, and I forget who was kind of talking about, I think it was Dadian, saying like voting isn't everything. but it's an important thing happening this year. There's a lot of other ways to be politically engaged, and I want to talk about those too. But I want to talk about voting for a second, because we certainly have talked to students this year who aren't sure if they want to vote or aren't planning on voting, or feel like they don't really have a reason to vote. So my question is pretty simple. Like, why are you voting? What motivates you to vote? And why should others consider voting in this election? And let's start with Stuart on this one.
All right. So why it's important to vote to me is, I think something that we forget often, maybe we take it for granted because we live in the strongest democracy that has existed, is that this strength of democracy, even though we are struggling now, is an anomaly. And we need to be aware of that. I understand that it is difficult to make choices, especially we had this issue in 2016. People still feel it now, is that when you're choosing, you don't really particularly like who you are choosing, but you have to do your best to get as close to what you want to vote for, what you want to see the country go towards. Because if we suppress ourselves in our own voter turnout and we weaken our democracy within ourselves, we can't model that for the rest of the world to continue to do for centuries to come.
Thanks for that. Dadian, what's your perspective on voting, and whether it's important or not in this cycle, why other students might consider voting?
Yeah, I would just start by saying I think there's a lot of voter hopelessness, especially among third parties, and especially among people who don't believe even in the major parties that their views are represented. But despite that, voting is absolutely necessary, because if you look at, so for libertarians, the past 4 election cycles, I'm pretty sure the voter turnout for libertarian candidates has doubled every cycle. It was, I think it was 4 million for Gary Johnson. It was 2 million before that, 1 million and 500,000. So it's absolutely crucial that we vote in order to at least gain some respectability in the electoral system. And then overall, I think voting is kind of an accountability system. It is the ability to choose our leaders and the ability to remove our leaders that applies that kind of pressure to keep them accountable, to reflect our values as their constituents. And when it comes to going beyond voting, I think applying pressure, showing up to local government, and making our voices heard is definitely also part of democracy. It's part and parcel of that kind of participation.
You're stealing my next question from me. Shane, go ahead on kind of the importance of voting in this cycle.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to one of my friends from back home who said he wasn't voting because he thought that if enough people don't vote, it could make a political statement where people would would be fed up, they could tell people are just fed up with the system and aren't voting, which I told him to me sounded crazy, because it sounds like what you're saying is I'm going to turn off my microphone in order to be heard, because the way we make political progress and political change is through voting and deciding our own government and what we want going forward. I think that's especially true right now, and I think it's especially true for Denison students. So Lincoln County made it a lot harder for Denison students to vote recently. And the reason why is because Lincoln County collectively has different political incentives than Denison students. But by allowing Lincoln County or a larger institution to suppress your vote and not even fighting back against it, it's really damaging. It sets a really bad precedent that says that you can just take away our political voice and we're not going to do anything about it. And so for that reason alone, I think it would be important. But then again, yeah, also because I don't really, to me, democracy is a core value. So going further, it's hard for me to put together, but I think it is important that we maintain a government that is governed by the will of the people.
Thank you for that. So I want to talk a little bit, you mentioned Lincoln County, and I want to talk a little bit about kind of down ballot races and what's happening at the local and state level. It's just something, Dadian, you hit on a little bit earlier, kind of the emphasis on local government. Every election year, there's kind of local and state, questions and candidates up on the ballot, but they tend to not attract, as much attention. I definitely have been involved in kind of this, what Do You Vote has been doing since the 2018 cycle. And can tell you in 2018, a lot less students at Denison voted. And that's a national trend, generally speaking. And it's because there isn't this presidential race on the ballot that kind of tends to draw more attention. So I'd be curious to hear from all of you kind of what's your perspective on kind of down ballot candidates and issues in the election. Do you have advice for students on kind of whether that's important, how to learn more about it? If there's a candidate or an issue down ballot that you're really paying attention to. And the second piece, I'm curious to learn where everyone, if you're comfortable sharing, plans on voting. If you kind of have a reason, like why you choose to register in Licking County and vote here versus vote at home, and everybody kind of has different reasons for doing that. I'd be curious to hear that piece. So kind of a twofold question. One, the first half is kind of down ballot races, the importance, your perspective on them. And the second is kind of where to vote and if you have a perspective on that or what you're doing personally. And we started with Stuart, I believe, on the last question. So Shane, if you want to go first this time.
Sure. So the first part was about local politics and why that's important. And then what was the second thing again? Sorry.
Where you're voting and kind of if there's some
Right.
significance to that too.
Yeah. So I forgot, maybe Tip O'Neill said all politics is local, which is really, I think, a true sentiment. The vast majority of how politics interacts with our daily lives is due to state, and even more so how our local community governs. I just talked about how like decisions made by Licking County affect how we can vote, which even impacts our national politics. So it happened with our local politics first. But also the impact you can have on local politics is so much more significant than the impact you can have on national politics. I think that's just kind of like self-explanatory, right? If there's like a smaller amount of people voting, then your vote's going to count more. So if you really want to, so the time you spend like focusing on local politics is going to have a like much more significant impact than time you spend focusing on national politics. So that's really important. I'm probably going to, so I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. So the difference between like where I'm registered at home and registering here isn't huge because all the state issues will be the same. But I haven't changed my registration yet, but I think I'm going to soon, like today, to vote here just so just because I'm considering voting early in person instead of voting through mail. That's the only reason, yeah.
Thanks for that. Dadian, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say the importance of local politics is in the fact that progress tends to begin at the grassroots level, right? Because the issues tend to be built up through state legislation before it actually gets to the federal. This happened with gay marriage. This has happened with for Roe v. Wade, like abortion legislation and that kind of thing. I am registered in Michigan, and I'm generally registered in Michigan because Michigan tends to swing, and my particular district is very much on the verge of being a red or a blue district. So depending on the cycle, I think it wouldn't really matter this election cycle because most likely I'm going to vote on principle. I'm going to vote for Jo Jorgensen. But a lot of times if I'm voting pragmatically and I want to cast my vote toward making my district red or blue for state elections, that's also important to me. Yeah, and then I guess I kind of answered the second part. If I was undecided up until recently because I was wavering between pragmatism and principle. I would have to say I was wavering between Biden in the sense of trying to protect civil liberties and trying to protect Roe v. Wade. But, thinking more deeply just about my values, and about the increasing trajectory of the Libertarian Party, I decided to vote for Jo Jorgensen, just on principle, on long-term political strategy.
Thanks for that. Stuart, go ahead.
Yeah, so to address the first part of the question about local politics, I think it's incredibly important to echo the sentiment of both Shane and Dadian. I think many people forget that most of the politics in this country is done at a local and state level, and that is then reflected upon at the national level. You can make far more of a difference and create far more change by being involved in those things, whether it's being working with candidates that are local, whether it's just making sure that you vote in the midterm elections. That is how you see what you want to see and how it's applied. And it can serve then as a model for the national government. That's often how policy comes about, and how, as Dadian mentioned, the Supreme Court eventually usually challenges things at a state level that may become national legislation. And so where am I voting? I will absolutely be voting in Ohio. It's, I think, more representative of what I want to see as a whole state, and also as a Westchester County Republican in New York. Even state local national impact would be minimal, and it's I don't really follow my local politics because of that. I know they wouldn't have an impact, so I know that I can actually have an impact on the nation here as opposed to anywhere else.
Great. So let's, there's been a lot in the news about what to make of this election. Questions about legitimacy, voter suppression, voter fraud, levels of participation being higher due to COVID, lower, vote by mail, just a lot of kind of worrying out there. And so I'd be curious to learn from everyone, what concerns you most, with this election, about like, really could be anything. What concerns you most, and what gives you hope? What makes you optimistic with this election? And let's start with Stuart.
All right. So I'll start out with the biggest worry and get to the good stuff at the end. My biggest worry is that we don't learn from the mistakes we made in 2015 and 16 in regards to how we treat ourselves, how we view politics as a whole in our society at this time. I know from study of foreign policy that the interference from Russian and Chinese factions is intentional, and it's something they've been doing for a long time in other countries, and have decided that we are weak enough that they can do that to us. And if we feed into that sentiment, the polarization, the hatred for the other side, the only thing that we do is undermine our own legitimacy and world legitimacy of democracy as an institution. And that is a very dangerous thing. And I would not want to see that for any of the generations to come. The good thing I have seen is generally there still is, of course, the polarization and the hostile environment, but it seems, at least on an individual level, people are more willing to listen than in 2016, which gives me hope, because perhaps we are reversing course, at least in some way, even if on policy and on candidates, we're not quite there yet.
Awesome. Dadian, go ahead.
I think I'm going to start with my greatest fear as well. And I think that is, while people are fighting amongst themselves for what they believe in, it's actually then that they're losing what they believe in a sense. We're kind of defraying our platform for debate and our platform for democratic participation with each other. And it's almost as if the more that we fight over these values, the more that we have special interests and bureaucrats in Washington sort of going against our interests, our common interests that we have between each other rather than against each other. We're going to get involved in more wars. There's going to be more spending on policing and military and higher taxes and all of these things that I think more generally we would prefer not to see happen. That doesn't hold true for everybody, but I'm just saying, like, in general, I think that our antipathy toward each other is much more distracting than it is constructive. And so my fear is that while we're taking part in this, the government is not going to necessarily even pay attention to one side or the other. I would have to say my hope, and actually I'm pretty optimistic about this fact, is that this sort of polarization will end. I think Stuart mentioned the fact that people, I do think, are more willing to talk to each other now than in 2016. I think we're coming to this, not really a breaking point, but more of a point of tolerance, not really a point of complete reconciliation. We don't fully understand each other, but we're definitely moving more toward tolerance than toward, say, like a civil war, which in 2016 many people actually thought was possible. So I'm pretty hopeful about the fact that life will go on after the election, and no matter what happens, we will rediscover our common interests. And so I don't think that no matter how the election goes, it's not going to be the end of the world for either side, so to speak.
Shane, give us a worry and a hope.
Yeah, I can definitely give you a worry. I'm really, really scared about the political legitimacy long-term of the United States. Because I think we find political legitimacy because we root it in democracy, and I think that democracy is resting on really shaky ground right now. So I think my primary concern, like the most immediate one right now, is I'm afraid that the president, and it's not really even a fear because like it confirmed, I mean, he said he would do it, that if the election does not go his way, he will not accept the results of it. He said that he said the last debate, right, that if he loses by in-mail ballots, which is a perfectly legitimate way to lose an election, especially during a pandemic, that he'll contest those results. I'm afraid if that goes to the Supreme Court right after this huge battle over the Supreme Court where he appoints a justice, where the Republican Party appointed justice, and then they also get to now, because of that, appoint a president, essentially. In stealing an election, I'd be really concerned about that. But I'm also concerned about the institutions long term that I feel like they're becoming they are becoming less democratic. The Electoral College is becoming less correlated with the popular vote over time, which is to me really concerning. I think it's going to increase polarization, increase partisanship if one side feels like that even though they have the political majority, they cannot, or the electoral majority, they cannot gain political representation. I think it's really concerning that people who are United States citizens right now for a long time have not been able to have political representation on the national government. So citizens in Puerto Rico, Guam, all U.S. territories, and Washington, D.C. I mean, at least Washington, D.C. gets electoral votes, but still, I think that's a really major concern that they don't get any representation in Congress. I am hopeful in a sense that I think it could be a turning point. So I think it's kind of a morbid analogy, but I think like when like people are drowning, they make like a lot of noise and start splashing around. I think right now, like our democracy's kind of being strangled, but people are going to make a lot of noise and they're going to start splashing around. And I think that does have a chance of saving us. I mean, you saw like in this summer, I was really inspired by how many people went out and were civically engaged doing protests, making sure their voices are heard. That's really inspiring to me. I feel like people aren't going to just submit to an unfair, like, or illegitimate political system. And I think that people who feel like their votes are being threatened are going to come out and vote for that. I don't think that a lot of voter suppression tactics are actually going to be counterintuitive. So yeah.
Just briefly on the topic of election legitimacy and really is, do you vote? Like our focus in terms of election administration is in Licking County. We've had kind of productive conversations over the years, but just recently this summer and fall with the director of the Licking County Board of Elections. And just want to kind of reassure everyone watching, you have 3 safe options to vote this election. You can vote early beginning this coming Tuesday in Newark at the Licking County Board of Elections. We'll be publicizing hours and information for that. So it starts Tuesday, October 6th and runs all the way to November 2nd. You can vote by mail. In Ohio, you have to request an absentee ballot. Ballots are not automatically sent to voters under any circumstances. But we have forms to do that on campus, and it's really easy to do. Voting by mail has been done since the Civil War in the United States and has a lot of history of use over the past several decades in Ohio. There's a bunch of different methods and safeguards used to ensure that your ballot is secure and counted. All mail-in ballots in Ohio are counted with a Republican and a Democrat present. So when your ballot actually makes it back to Licking County Board of Elections, the Republican judge will have a key and the Democrat judge will have a key in order to open the slot where your ballot's being held. So without those 2 keys, it will not open and your ballot won't be counted. Third parties also involved in the process, along with an entire nonpartisan staff of folks. And the last piece I wanted to mention for sure is that in-person election day voting option. So in Ohio, the polls are open from 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. on election day. For everybody who lives on campus and is registered to vote in Licking County, you can vote in person at the polls. The Denison's approved this. There are all sorts of precautions being taken place related to COVID. You'll have to wear a mask. There'll be social distancing. You'll sanitize your hands before and after use of the machines down there. They've really got everything sorted out in that regard. Several Denison students will be poll workers this year, and we'll be able to help you if you have like Denison specific questions for voting. So just kind of want to reassure folks that they have those options. One note just related to mail-in ballots, and I think all of the partisan organizations on campus have done a really good job with this messaging. Please remember to read the instructions when you receive your mail-in ballot. Pretty much every state requires that you sign an affidavit on your ballot and also provide a form of ID. Often it's the last 4 digits of your social security number or driver's license number. Some states require it's actually a physical, paper copy of an ID, things of that sort. To include those with your ballot and to mail your ballot back as soon as possible after receiving it. You don't want your vote not to be counted because you weren't able to get it to where it needs to be in time. So just kind of wanted to add that on the topic of legitimacy. And kind of the last question that we had here, because I want to leave time, we have some people who are joining us live now and want them to be able to ask questions. What things are your partisan organizations or just your organizations on campus, I keep saying partisan, I don't know why, your organizations on campus doing related to the election? So are you having weekly meetings and when are they? How can folks attend? Are there other events you guys are planning? Are you phone banking, letter writing, protesting, other things, just any political activity you might be doing this fall that the folks who are joining us can do? So Dadian, let's have you go first. Libertarians.
Right. So yeah, for the Libertarians, we've been meeting weekly. We generally meet Friday for a socially distanced dinner. Yeah, this is kind of different from the past. We used to gather sort of inside in Higley, but with social distancing, we decided, okay, let's meet outside. Just kind of related to getting more socially connected on campus, we've decided to do a cookout this weekend. So stay tuned for that. We're going to be advertising that. Yeah, so I mean, we've been keeping our eye on what's going on for like nationally Georgia Uritson hasn't been doing any debates. She hasn't been invited to the debates under the debate commission. So we've been trying to keep our eye on some kind of event we can put on in that regard, something we can stream. But right now she's pretty much doing a bus tour. So then I've also been looking into something more local. So other than that, I mean, we've just been sort of getting the message out to, this is how, this is the proper way to receive your absentee ballot and that kind of thing. So I'm quite certain all of our members are registered and will be receiving an absentee ballot. Yeah, and then in our meetings, we basically go over the news and talk about current events and just sort of stay up to date on the election. And then I know for sure I personally and some of the other members would have watched the debate between Trump and Biden last night. So we'll be talking about that on Friday.
Great. Stuart, what are the Denison College Republicans up to this semester?
Yeah, so along similar lines to Dadian, we are doing weekly meetings on Thursdays at 7. We too are doing our best to adhere to the guidelines and doing outdoor discussions with 6 feet between our members. In terms of other involvement, obviously it can be kind of difficult to do as of right now, but I know for a fact that the state party is very accommodating in doing remote volunteering, making phone calls, emails, such. So we are interested in doing that with local candidates, and that's about the extent.
Thanks. And Shane, what are the Denison Democrats doing this semester?
We have meetings every other week, 8:30, Burton Morgan Lecture Hall. Everybody's 6 feet apart. We don't have usually more than 20 people coming, so it's not really as much of an issue social distancing wise. We also are, encouraging people to volunteer. We have tons of phone banking opportunities. We usually send that out in our email list, including also links to helping with DU vote stuff. We really encourage that. Registering voters is huge and really important. So yeah, we usually, there's so many opportunities, couldn't rattle them off right now, but yeah, most emails we send, we put a list of opportunities that people have, but yeah, there's a bunch.
And just for everybody, I feel like this is important, particularly for folks who might not be as familiar with your organizations. How can they get connected with your org? Do you have social media accounts they should be following, or should they email you directly? What's your recommendation in that regard? Stuart, you can go first.
Yeah, so we have multiple methods. You can get in contact with the Denison College Republicans. We have an Instagram, which is Denison College Republicans. If you were interested in getting involved or anything you had questions about, you can DM that account and you will get a response. Or if anyone wanted to email me personally, I will be happy to take any questions, regardless of affiliation, about our organization and about politics as a whole.
Awesome, thank you. Dadian, how can folks get in touch with the libertarians on campus?
So we pretty much go through email on all of our advertisements and at involvement fairs. I put my personal email there. And then we have a rolling GroupMe entry. So if anybody is actually interested in joining, they can join through that. But if we do events, I generally send out an email. So there's also an email list. Somebody can email me with, their interest in being on that list. Yeah, we also have a Facebook page that's not really that up to date though, so that's not where I would go. So in case, just to deter people from maybe relying on that, because we mostly go through email.
When I was a first year at Denison, all of the partisan organizations only used Facebook. That was the means to get the word out. And now that I'm a senior, it's everybody uses Instagram or just nothing.
Right.
Yeah. Shane, for Denison Dems, do you guys have an Instagram or email that folks should be reaching out to?
Yeah, we have an Instagram. That's probably the Instagram or my personal email, silva_s1@denison.edu, or any any like exec members, but I can't memorize all their their emails off the top of my head. But yeah, if you email or Instagram message is probably the best way. And then just, we can add you to an email list too, where we send out most of our emails through. We also have a Facebook account. You probably can get in contact through us that way, but it's probably not the best way. We technically have a Tumblr. Don't use that. I don't think we even know the password to that anymore. And we have a Twitter account technically too. I wouldn't use that either.
Great. Are there any questions from the attendees who are with us right now for the folks that we have? We'll give it a little bit just to see if anybody has any questions, and if they don't, we'll wrap up. I think this has been a really productive conversation. Was happy to get everybody together for this, and hopefully these organizations that are here today can kind of continue to collaborate and potentially do additional events in the run-up or even after to the election. I think it would be great to do kind of a reflection on the outcome whenever we find that out. Might be a few days or weeks potentially, but I think it would be helpful to process that. So it looks like we've got in the Q&A from Jacob Lucas. Your question was, will any partisan orgs or DU votes be hosting watch parties on election night? I can share that DU votes and Denison as a whole are hosting watch parties on election night. I know we have Slater third floor, and I believe the auditorium reserved as well. We will not be keeping results running until 6 a.m. in the morning. So we'll ask everybody to head home at a certain hour. There's only so much that we'll be able to learn. Are any of your organizations planning on holding your own election night watch parties?
Maybe, but we're still working on the logistics for that. So stay tuned.
Same with us.
Great.
We would most likely join the DU votes or the General Denison watch party.
Okay, awesome. And we have a question from Dr. Yang for you all. Any thoughts to share on the debate on Tuesday night? So pretty open-ended question, but just if anyone has thoughts on kind of what they made of how that went down, or who won, however you want to frame that.
So I'll go with this. I'd say well, if we wanted to declare a winner, I don't frankly think either candidate really won. I think across the political spectrum, from far right to far left, all seem to generally hate it for one reason or another. As a fan of civil discourse and organized debate, it was messy and not very entertaining to watch, frankly. And I like to think that with our goals, especially what we've spoken about here today, all of us kind of would like to avoid the disrespectful nature of what it became. And that was disappointing to me. From a Republican perspective, I don't think it helped the Republican Party at all. But like I said, I don't think anyone won. If you were to declare a winner, it would be those who seek to undermine democracy anywhere in the world.
Yeah, I would just add on to that and say, I started watching it, and when it started to get messy, I logged out because I didn't find a point other than entertainment, so to speak. I sort of just getting at each other's throats and involving the moderator was not constructive in my view, which is why I decided not to continue to watch it. though from what I've heard from the rest of the debate, there were some disheartening things certainly said. Like for one, there was a far right group that was emboldened by something that Trump said, and I found that pretty disheartening to hear. I think he said, stand back and stand by, and people took that as a call to action. So I'm sure if I had watched that part of the debate that I would have a different opinion on it possibly, but I don't know. It's a little bit disheartening to see the reaction to the debate in general.
Yeah, I agree with Stuart that the winner of the debate was people or forces seeking to undermine American democracy. I think they got a lot out of that by the president continuing to question the legitimacy of our upcoming election. I think white supremacists also were the winners of that debate because they were emboldened by the president. I think it was messy on both sides, but I don't want to paint a false equivalency. I think you had one candidate, promoting white supremacists, questioning the legitimacy of American democracy, basically rooting for or attempting to, contest the election in the future. What appears to be so far a completely fair election. Yeah, I think it was really sad. I don't think that it was helpful. I think in the future, I don't really think there's much like moderators can really do about it. I think you clearly had Trump trying to win the debate by throwing Biden off because he has a stutter. I don't think that that's a moderation problem. I think that's an individual problem with the people on stage. So yeah, I don't really know where to go forward from this point with debates. I don't think Donald Trump would sign on to rules that say we can mute like the candidates' mics. That just didn't seem like would be consistent with his strategy. So yeah, I don't really have much like optimism to offer about that debate.
I have one last point, and it's kind of echoing Dadian and Shane's about the troubling comments that were made at some point. I do think there is an equivalency in a way. I think it was incredibly disappointing that neither candidate was willing to stand up to the fringe parts of their party, which have become increasingly loud over the past 4 years. And the only way that I can see us getting beyond this, considering how much influence national level candidates have, is once we are willing and able, both parties, to condemn violence explicitly by name of organizations and ideas, as someone would say.
Okay. Any other questions for folks who are joining us right now? And while we're waiting to see if anything comes in, just for those who are watching or going to watch the recording later, just wanted to share upcoming events that DU Votes and Denison are holding related to the election. So as most folks probably know, Monday, October 5th is the deadline to register to vote in Ohio / update your voter registration. DU Votes will be tabling at the flu shot clinic on Slater 3rd floor on next Tuesday. Next Wednesday, October 7th, is the vice presidential debate. So two of the candidates for vice president, Mike Pence, Vice President Mike Pence, and Senator Kamala Harris will be debating, and DU Votes will be streaming that live via Zoom from 9 to 10:30. There will also be in-person watch parties in Slater Auditorium and Burton Morgan Lecture Hall, potentially Slater 3rd floor as well, just making sure that space is still available for us. On Thursday, during this common hour time, our next election series event is Black Lives Matter and Social Movements. We have a really great panel of students, but also faculty from academic disciplines across campus who will be joining us, and that will be on Slater 3rd floor, but also streamed live via Zoom again, and there'll be a recording available for remote students and folks who miss it. On Thursday, lots of events next week. Thursday evening, The Beck series is hosting Connie Schultz and Troy Clark in conversation. That's a virtual event via Zoom, and the registration link is on the Beck series website and also on our election events calendar that was shared with the campus recently. And in addition, in the evening next Thursday, so lots going on, Dr. Katz and Dr. Kelly from the Political Science Department will be hosting a conversation as a part of our election series from 7 to 8 p.m. on foreign and domestic policy issues in the election. The location is TBD for kind of in-person attendance there, but definitely streamed via Zoom. Friday will be the Ohio Supreme Court. There are 2 seats up for election. We'll be live streaming that debate. And on Saturday, we will be knocking doors with DCA to encourage folks to make sure that they've either requested their mail-in ballot or that they have a plan to vote either early or in person on election day. Are there any other questions that have come in since I read through that? Like, next week's really busy. No. Okay. Well, this has been really productive. Again, thank you so much, Dadian, Stuart, and Shane for joining us, and to everybody who was able to join us live and ask questions. We really appreciate your continued participation. And for those watching the recording, I hope you enjoy this discussion. Everybody have a good rest of their Thursday.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks. See ya.